Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for CHEA's webinar on understanding CHEA recognition and its importance to higher education institutions. My name is Lori Schrader. I'm the Vice President for Recognition Services, and I'm going to help moderate our engaging discussion today. I'm really excited for CHEA to be offering this webinar. So often I respond to questions about what the benefit of CHEA recognition is to the accrediting organizations that CHEA recognizes. But today our focus is really going to be on how CHEA recognition benefits our member institutions. Let me take a moment to introduce our distinguished panel of speakers today. I'm going to just give a little brief bio, and hopefully I won't muddle it up too much. So we're going to start with Darrell Cain. He holds a firm conviction for teaching and learning and currently teaches in the graduate school at the University of Maryland, University College. He has over 16 years of teaching and research experience and has presented and authored numerous articles. His research interest is centered on the this is the word that I'm going to mess up today, pedagogical implications of teaching and learning with technology, student retention and success, and learning outcomes assessment. Dr. Cain graduated with his bachelor's degree from Indiana University. He earned a master's degree from Ball State University in college student personnel administration and higher ed. He obtained his Doctor of Philosophy in Education Leadership and Policy Studies while minoring in instructional technology from Virginia Tech University. Dr. Cain currently serves as the president of Pierce College, Puyallup in Puyallup, Washington, and has held positions as Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Vice President of Academic Affairs, and Dean of Academic Affairs. He currently also serves as a peer reviewer for the Higher Learning Commission and is a member of the CHEA Board of Directors. Bob Clark earned a BA in Spanish, a BS in Business Administration, and an MBA from the University of Maine. He was awarded the PhD in Finance from Purdue University. I did not speak to Darrell and Bob about the in-state rivalry between Purdue and Indiana. We could perhaps get to that later. And also earned the Chartered Financial Analyst Professional designation prior to assuming the Husson University presidency on January 1st, 2010. Clark served as the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and Dean of the Schrader Family School of Business Administration at the University of Evansville in Indiana. He also was the founding executive director of the university's Institute for Global Enterprise in Indiana. He has held academic appointments as a faculty member in finance and global business at Butler University, the University of Tampa, and the University of Vermont. In addition, he has experience as a United States Army Administrative Officer, consultant, pension administrator, and controller. Dr. Clark has served as a Fulbright Scholar at the Norwegian School of Management and as a guest faculty member at the Business and Economics University in Vienna. Dr. Clark is also currently a member of the CHEA Board of Directors. Last but certainly not least, Leah Matthews serves as the Executive Director of the Distance Education Accrediting Commission located in Washington, D.C. The DEAC is a private nonprofit organization founded in 1926 that accredits fully distance education institutions serving nearly 1.2 million students annually. The DEAC is recognized by the U.S. Department of Education and the Council for Higher Education Accreditation. Ms. Matthews holds a Bachelor of Arts in Music from Westminster College, New Wilmington, Pennsylvania, a Master of Public Administration from the University of Oklahoma, and a PhD in Education from George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. So that gives you a little idea of the terrific expanse of expertise that we have on the panel today. And I am now going to have us advance the slide and turn it over to Bob Clark.
Thank you, Lori. One of the things I think is really critically important to us all is that CHEA is the only national organization focused exclusively on higher education accreditation and quality assurance. And so what we want to spend some time today is talking about that importance and what the organization does for its membership. And I will go through the slides to give you a little framework of the background. CHEA was formed as a referendum of college and university presidents in 1996 when they saw that there was no organizing fashion that attended to the issues related to accreditation. The recognition process is an examination of quality, effectiveness, and ability of accrediting organizations to accredit degree-granting higher education institutions and/or programs that they offer. And when you see the membership of the organizations that do the accrediting, you'll find there are institution-wide accreditors, and then there are programmatic specific accreditors in the role. Accreditation using nationally and professionally approved rigorous academic standards confirms quality assurance and a commitment to quality improvement in higher education. A CHEA-recognized accrediting organization has core values that are specific to institutional accountability and student success, and that can provide evidence of those values and standard to the public. And that is one of the critical elements of accreditation, is that it does allow individual public members to know that the institutions and its programs have gone through rigorous review and have met quality standards. CHEA recognition is not subject to any governmental authority or political ideology and serves as an impartial public authority for colleges and universities. Please advance the slide. CHEA recognizes sound and effective higher education accrediting bodies. It conducts and coordinates research, debate, and processes that improve accreditation. Serves as a national advocate for voluntary self-regulation through accreditation. Collects and disseminates data and information about accreditation through a biennial public almanac. It also mediates disputes and fosters communication between and among accrediting bodies and the higher education community. And it works to preserve the quality and diversity of colleges and universities. Advance the slides, please. When we look at CHEA recognition, it provides that assurance to the public and to the organization that accrediting organizations are demonstrating the same expectations that are required of the institutions and/or programs they accredit, with a focus on student success, innovative practices, public accountability, continuous improvement, implementing rigorous standards that protect students and families, fairness in application of standards, commitment to diversity and autonomy of institutional missions, and a willingness to address concerns regarding its role as an authority for oversight. Slide. When we look at the numbers, CHEA recognizes 64 accrediting organizations representing 12 institutional accrediting organizations, regional, career-related, and faith-related. It also recognizes 52 programmatic accrediting organizations. Of the 64 accrediting organizations that CHEA represents, 23 are also recognized by the United States Department of Education. There are 89 recognized accrediting organizations, CHEA and/or the United States Department of Education in the United States. Slide. At this time, we would like to invite you into a discussion model. And I am thankful that I'm joined by my colleagues, and then also we can rely on Lori, who has some expertise as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate it. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So often in a webinar, we spend a lot of time looking at slides and trying to quickly take notes and think about, what's important from that slide that I need to remember. But today we've taken a little bit of a different tack. We really want to engage in a conversation about how CHEA recognition benefits the accrediting organization, and by extension benefits those institutions such as Husson University and Pierce College, Puyallup, that are also members of CHEA. So I'm going to get the discussion started by directing a question to Leah. So Leah, DEAC is recognized by CHEA and USDE. Can you talk a little bit about why DEAC has chosen dual recognition? Leah, you're muted.
Yeah, we've all done this before, right? We've all been stuck on mute at the time we're asked a question in a Zoom webinar. Thank you, Lori, for including me today. It's great to be here with Bob and Darrell and you to talk about accreditation and recognition. So you asked me, why would an accreditor want to go through the process of recognition with the Department of Education and with CHEA? The reason is because there's great value in both processes, and both processes focus on different aspects of an accrediting organization's role. The Department of Education, which isn't the topic of today's webinar, but just to briefly mention, has a focus on accountability for federal financial aid dollars, federally funded programs that help students to finance their education. And accreditors are part of a process of assuring that those dollars are being used for education quality and helping students achieve the educational outcomes that they're set forth to pursue. CHEA has a different kind of accountability, and its focus is on the academics, and its focus represents the peer community in higher education and their fundamental tenets and belief about what academic quality, peer review, continuous improvement mean in higher education. So by participating in both, DEAC undergoes a review of its standards and processes that account for how federal financial aid is used and other aspects that the government wants to see in education quality and in an accreditation process. CHEA comes from within, and DEAC values being part of a community of educators, of academics that engage in peer review and quality assurance around the student experience and the students' learning outcomes.
Thank you. So I think you've touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to be more direct in my questions so that we can focus in on your response. So can you talk a little bit more about what it is that CHEA recognition offers DEAC that USDE does not? And this is not to say that one is better than the other, but the emphasis is, of course, on what CHEA's recognition brings to the table.
CHEA comes from a tradition that recognition of accreditation is a key strategy for education quality, accountability, and improvement. Something CHEA has done is really move the needle on accountability and transparency. CHEA has called for accreditors to be more transparent with accreditation decisions about data on student achievement. CHEA puts the student at the center of its work. And when you look at CHEA's mission, it is about quality education for the students, their families, and all of the other stakeholders that will benefit from that quality education for that student. And so with this kind of tradition within higher education and CHEA's kind of grounding in quality improvement, continuous improvement, that's something that if DEAC is going to be true to its mission to serve students in distance education, we want to be reviewed against the academic principles and expectations that the rest of the academic community is reviewed for.
Terrific. Thank you for your expanding on that response. So I'm curious, I have a two-part question for you. So I'd like to know how CHEA recognition specifically benefits the institutions that DEAC accredits. And I'd also like to know if you have anything to add. You mentioned in your prior response that CHEA has really moved the needle on ensuring that accrediting organizations are being more transparent and accountable about their decision-making process and making more information public, not just about the decisions that they make, but also about student outcomes data. So the second part of my question is, have you gotten any resistance from your member institutions or concerns about how CHEA has moved the needle on some of these fundamental things on which CHEA pins its mission?
Well, Lori, I'm so glad we have notes that we shared between us for this webinar, because that was a very long and involved question. And
Sorry.
I have my notes from what we discussed about sharing more on this topic. And I think every institution benefits when it's called to put a lens on data about student achievement in their institution and their program. And one of the CHEA recognition standards that DEAC has looked at very carefully, has built it into its own standards of review, is this transparency on evidence of student achievement at program level, at institution level, in the context of institution mission. And CHEA having that standard and then holding all of the accrediting organizations that recognizes to that standard, I think brings a level of consistency to sharing information with the public and prospective students about the performance of institutions and their programs, raising the expectations that that data is going to be available. And I think it also helps the institution plan for its next improvements. You know, it has an obligation to make this data public through its website and other means. So, you know, having that kind of lens on institution performance, I think raises expectations and pushes an institution to improve. I like this approach by CHEA calling on the institutions to be transparent, because we have lots of other transparency efforts in higher education right now. There's College Scorecard, there's other College Navigator, other information that the government assembles from iPads and sources of federal information. But what CHEA is doing is pulling together the academic community to look at outcomes in the context of institution mission and publishing that data on student achievement. So for DEAC, that's something that we have looked at very carefully. We've also looked at our own practices on transparency, what information we share with the public about an institution's performance, and how we can be more proactive as, you know, an arbiter of quality, engaging in this community at CHEA, and also making our very best effort to try to promote increased transparency among our activities as an accreditor. At the end of your question, Laura, you asked me about resistance. Change is hard. You know, and when CHEA makes changes to its recognition standards, of course, that brings a lot of dialogue into the picture. CHEA just recently closed a call for comment period on its recognition standards, and DEAC participated in providing comments. And so anytime there's change, there needs to be good communication, good dialogue, good explanations, and then, you know, time to implement that change and then reflect on it and how can we do better. And so working through any resistance to change is part of what all accreditors and institutions are part of. The fact that we do this as a community in CHEA, I think, benefits the students and the public overall.
Thank you. Bob and Darrell, I want to ask you a question similar to what I just asked Leah. I'm going off script a little bit, so you'll have to forgive me. But you know, one of the questions that I just asked Leah had to do with how the institutions that DEAC accredits, how they have felt about these transparency and accountability standards, particularly around making public the student achievement data. And as you both are presidents of institutions that are not only members of CHEA, but that are that have accreditation by several CHEA-recognized accrediting organizations, I wonder if either of you has, and you might not, but if either one of you has anything you might like to share about your experience with making public that student achievement data that CHEA-recognized accrediting organizations require.
Okay, well, I'll just start in. I think that, you know, one of the things that recognized, as Leah eloquently said, is that it also elevates in terms of the importance of the quality of programs and services that we're offering. I think as it relates to transparency and also the level of accountability, I think it provides some reassurances. A lot of times what happens, whether you have an incoming student or you may have parents from families, they want to know that they're going to an institution that's going to provide the best opportunity for their students to succeed. I think that as relates to understanding the transparency that it's fulfilling its objectives as it relates to its desired mission and goals. And it provides an opportunity to make sure that, for example, I think that one of our accreditors is the Accreditation Commission for Education and Nursing, our ACEN. But one of the key marking points of transparency is students want to know what's the passage rates, how many students are actually passing, what's the success rates on the NCLEX exam. And so that helps to elevate the importance and need why we need to make sure that information of success is publicized. Also, too, it provides reassurances for, again, the students and family members, knowing that they're going to a quality institution. And also, too, it helps us as an institution because it recognizes that if we're falling below a certain benchmark, we need to do something to change that. And so we're looking for continuous improvement. So I think those are some of the benefits.
Thank you. Terrific.
I also would echo that from the transparency from families, but Husson has 9 different accreditors that we're responding to in terms of preparing information. And it allows us to understand what are the standards and give us those baselines to be able to excel and to achieve and focus. And as Darrell indicated, you know, if the benchmarks aren't being met, what do you do next?
Terrific. So I'm going to continue with Bob and Darrell, but of course, Leah, if you know that you have something terrific to add, feel free to jump in. So we know, and we've already talked about, that accreditation is an important, necessary, objective peer review process that not only provides an opportunity for continuous quality improvement, but it also may provide access to federal financial aid money. And as Darrell just referred to, eligibility for students to sit for licensure or certification exams. So I'm just curious, at your 2 institutions, and perhaps these decisions predate you, did recognition by CHEA and/or USDE influence your institution's decision when deciding what accrediting organizations, institutional and/or programmatic, to seek accreditation from when a choice existed? If so, in what way? So if I could just use an example. So Darrell, you mentioned ACEN, which accredits all types of nursing degree programs, from diploma up to the Doctor of Nursing Practice. There are other nursing accrediting bodies that don't accredit the same breadth of programs that ACEN does, but where there is some overlap. So that's just an example. I'm not putting you on the spot for this particular question, Darrell, but I am curious if the recognition by CHEA and/or USDE is discussed at your, at the institutional level, if your faculty and administrators talk about the recognition by accreditors by USDE or CHEA, and how that's influenced your decisions about accreditation at your institutions.
Well, I appreciate the question, a very good question. And as it relates to my tenure, I'm currently in my 3rd year. So I can't say in terms of the history, in terms of what the conversation has included as it relates to the topics of the accreditors. But what I will say is that at this point in time, we're always examining and looking at, in terms of our ability to function at a high level. And so we recognize that through accrediting bodies, that there are, just like institutions, or, there are some that do extremely well, some that's on a cutting edge, and there's others that, again, they're just trying to figure it out. And we recognize that, at least the conversations we're having, is that we want to be associated with those programs and those organizations, those agencies that have raised the bar, that challenges us, that make sure that we provide exemplary programs and services. We want our students to be at the highest level of ability, and because of the accountability that CHEA has, it helps us to know that our regional accrediting agency or our professional organizations which we're accredited by, that they also resemble those same standards, because CHEA has set the benchmark. And that's something that's really important to us. And so I would say that that's something we'll continue to have conversations about, and making sure that regardless of the accrediting body or agency, it's at one of the highest levels. So it makes sure that we are also being accountable.
Perfect, thank you.
And I would echo that same decision-making process. I've been here 12 years, and many of these decisions were made earlier than my tenure. However, there are several, as we looked at programmatic improvements, we wanted to be associated with accrediting bodies that basically had national recognition standards and were able to take the institution to that next level, if you will. So, and I would just pick on one of them, for example, CACREP for counseling and those sort of things. So that recognition by CHEA was an important factor in being able to assert the quality of their programs, and the fact that they, as an accrediting body, doesn't mean it's good or bad or whatever, as you said at the beginning, but it does give the institution a standard to understand it's being met by the accrediting body itself, and then not just arbitrary. So when that decision is made and reaffirmed each time we go up for reaccreditation in different areas, those factors are important to the organization.
Thank you. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and throw a question out to all three of you. There are many people that believe that politics and ideology have increasingly influenced decisions made by USDE specific to accreditation regulations and the recognition of accrediting organizations. I'm curious, do institutions of higher education have concerns about the politicization of accreditation and recognition? And what about concerns on the part of accrediting organizations? You know, because administrations can change as early as every 4 years, right? And at maximum every 8 years. So I'm just curious what you all think of that and how it affects your work in relation to accreditation and recognition.
I'm not sure anybody wants to go first.
I'll offer to go first, Bob, if you like. I was just busy getting myself off mute. Well, for accreditation, we certainly are stuck on a pendulum that tends to swing between ideas about accreditation and accreditation's role. Under Obama, we saw accreditors reviewed with great scrutiny over accreditation decisions on for-profit institutions. They tended to put institutions in categories. They created databases and tools to use to look at the performance of accreditors and specific to the performance of institutions. They asked NACICI, which is the National Advisory Committee for Institutional Quality and Integrity, to look at accreditors and their institution performance, you know, through a lot of different lenses. They created the database of accredited post-secondary institutions and programs called DAPIP for short, where accreditors produce, you know, updates on their accreditation actions in the centralized database of the Department of Education. They've added information to the college scorecard about institution and program performance based on iPads. You know, then under the Trump administration, we saw other things happen. We saw some terminologies changed. We saw them use negotiated rulemaking to achieve consensus around some ideas about the geography of accreditation. And they removed some terms around regional accreditation and national accreditation, and you know, made some statements about those terms and their negotiated rulemaking efforts. And then now we're back into another set of negotiated rulemaking around things like borrower defense to repayment, which is, an area of great interest right now. Were borrowers somehow misled or misinformed about an institution or program? Are they eligible for some kind of discharge of their loan obligations? And so borrower defense to repayment is coming up again when it really hadn't been examined over the last 4 years. So all of these activities, and I'm speaking very quickly because there's a lot of them, they put accreditors on a pendulum, and you kind of swing back and forth to try to fulfill these obligations through recognition with the Department of Ed, then the seeking expectations, and kind of what the political emphasis is, of the day. That's kind of where I am right now in terms of watching the next pendulum swing, and expecting that accreditors are going to start to see some different kinds of guidance than we've seen over the last 4 years.
Leah, I really appreciate you offering that litany, if you will, of the kinds of changes that can be seen in that pendulum swing. And you mentioned one that's actually referenced in a question that one of our participants has asked, which is related to terminology specific to accreditation. And I'll try to jump in and answer this. And if you as the other accreditor, if you will, on the webinar want to jump in for any clarification, please feel free to. The question has to do with the categorization of national versus regional. And, in my world, I tend to think of accreditors in two different categories. One is institutional and one is programmatic. And so you have accrediting organizations whose role and responsibility it is to review the entire institution and its operations. And then you have the other kind of accreditor, the programmatic accreditor, whose role and responsibility it is to look at a specific area of study, whether that's nursing or architecture or library sciences, occupational therapy, those kinds of things. When it comes to the institutional accreditors, over time, there was language associated with them, in particular to the regional accrediting bodies and the national accrediting bodies. And the distinction really was that we have 7 regional accrediting organizations, and they divvied up the country. And so if you were an institution that operated in the part of the country that belonged to one of those regional accreditors, then you could seek institutional accreditation from one of those regional accrediting bodies. There are also national accrediting bodies such as DEAC, who has always accredited across borders, if you will, across state lines. And under the prior administration, there was an effort made to lessen the distinction that exists out in the community of institutions and accreditors, that there was something better about a regional accrediting organization versus a national accrediting organization. And so the department changed in regulatory language, but not in the law. The terminology regional still exists. It's not incorrect to refer to the regional accrediting organizations as regionals. But the boundaries, the restrictions on the regional accrediting organizations to operate only in those parts of the country that had been divvied up for them has been removed. So in that sense, all institutional accreditors are now national. Did I explain that in a way that makes sense, Leah? Or do you have a better way to put a lens on that?
Well, these categories for institutional accreditors, the categories of regional, the categories of national faith or national career or specialized programmatic have been in place for a very long time, well over 100 years. They've been used to define different types of accreditation that have evolved. We have all evolved in distance education, which is now a primary feature of higher education. We've evolved where institutions have created networks of branch locations that certainly are crossing regional boundaries. And then we're also serving a very different student body than we did when these categories were created. And so, in the course of a year and in the course of changing language on some documents and some rules internally at the Department of Education, we're not going to completely get to a fully embraced change, but we're starting to have important conversations about what's best for students. And what's best for students is to have equal and fair treatment of their degree credentials, the specialized accreditation that goes with that credential, the opportunity to use these credentials to gain employment, to advance their studies and to graduate work. These boundaries around accreditation, that's an important change. And it has great meaning to many, many people in higher education. But starting the conversations is a good place that get us where we want to be to help our students achieve their goals.
Very well stated, Leah. Thank you for that follow-up. If we can get back a little bit to, and I really want to throw this to Darrell and Bob, because Leah, you were brave and talked about how the changes in administration can really affect accrediting organizations and what's required of them in a way that almost creates a whiplash, because it can occur so quickly and because change is slow. So most accrediting organizations are reviewing and revising their standards, for instance, every 5 years. But if an administration is changing every 4 years, it's hard to keep up. So I'm curious, Bob and Darrell, if your institutions have any concerns about, in particular, how changes at the federal level with USDE affect what accrediting organizations are going to be requiring of your institutions. And the reason I'm asking this question is because it's a distinction between USDE and CHEA. The winds of change with the administration don't really affect CHEA's standards. Rather, what affects CHEA's standards is the academy and the assurance of academic quality, and how CHEA can help make sure that is staying in place and current, and looking at innovation and those kinds of things. So just some thoughts.
I'll just share. I think that, as you talk about the changes of new administration, obviously, if there are situations where we have a new administration and there's drastic change, obviously this causes a disruption. But I will say that recognizing from the USDA, DE, which provides, again, a lot of emphasis on Title IV funding, but knowing that CHEA is focused on academic quality, and knowing that there's going to be a level of consistency in that process, I think provides a level of calmness, understanding, and also provides us to provide assurances for our students without drastic changes. And I'll just give an example. As we talk about quality standards, the fact that we want to make sure that we have faculty who meet a level of, academic quality by having degree credentials intact to perform at their highest level to meet the subject matter instruction that is provided in the classroom. And if there was drastic changes, obviously we'll have to find new instructors, or we may lose instructors, or we have to retrain new instructors. And that's just daunting, even thinking about the fiscal impact that it would have. And so there's a level of stability with CHEA, knowing that we don't see those drastic changes occurring. I think with CHEA, we see that there's enhancements that to be made, but the enhancements are based on fundamental values of what's in the best interest of the institution, meaning that in terms of reassuring that there will be quality standards in place to meet the rigor and demands to meet our student needs. And so I feel a level of stability with CHEA, and regardless of who's in administration, that I don't have to go back and forth and wonder what's going to happen next. And so I think that's one of the advantages of, with CHEA, is that there is a level of consistency, but when there is change, it's usually a time limit, and there's parameters, there's guidelines, there's structure behind it. And so we make sure that we adhere to them within a timely manner. So
Thank you.
I feel the same confidence that CHEA is in a non-governmental way, and reminding ourselves that it is sort of a self-voluntary regulatory environment that we enter into. On a practical level, a lot of these issues depend on where you are in the cycle of reporting and responding. And, it depends where in that cycle, if you will, the institution is. We are always responding to changes in the environment, whether it's political or otherwise in the professions. And so, even as we prepare, for example, for our 10th year review in 2023, under the New England Commission of Higher Education, there are things that are going to be changing, and processes that are going to be changing, and procedures that are going to be changing. And they're not always governmentally driven, but are they ways that we can improve our quality assurance to students, to their families? There have been a lot of changes in New England, for example, on financial issues. We had some institutions that, let's say, closed unexpectedly due to the challenges economically that they faced. And the accrediting bodies started taking a look at how could we be more prepared and more transparent in the process. So all of a sudden we have a whole new framework. It didn't necessarily come from Washington, D.C. Perhaps it was in anticipation and et cetera. So being responsive is kind of something the organizations are consistently engaged in. And I think the good aspects of CHEA is they are looking at it from a different lens than USD would be looking at things. And that's comforting, and a reassurance that, it's going to be for a betterment process, not just for the sake of politics.
Thank you. All three of you have talked about consistency, and there's consistency in what the standards are, right? So there's the type of consistency where we talk about what the expectations are. And then there's consistency in the way that the standards are applied. So first we have, these are the standards, or these are the procedures, and they may swing depending on political winds. But then you also have consistency in the process. And so I don't know that there's anything to add here or thoughts, but I'm curious as to what your experience has been as, it's really from two different lenses, Bob and Darrell as university presidents, seeing the consistency in the accrediting organizations that come into your institution, whether they're the institutional or the programmatic accreditors, in applying those standards. And then Leah, your experience in having recognition standards applied to DEAC.
I do think it's important to remember that we are driven by peer reviews in these processes. And there are differences in interpretation at times and et cetera. And I think that many of the accrediting bodies, as an accreditor, educates the teams that go forth with the ideas that, here's what we're trying to do for consistency purposes from the organization. And this is interpretation wise from the accreditors. But there's still that room for, why do we have peers going out doing an assessment and process? Because it is peer reviewed, peer driven, and peer assessed. And that has benefits in terms of the long-term implications. But I do think accreditors, in my view, all of our accreditors have done great jobs of educating those teams that have gone out on their behalf, if you will, to do field testing, if you will. Sometimes we may disagree with the interpretation or a new interpretation that we weren't prepared for, but that is all part of peer review.
Thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
I would add to what Bob says about the peer review process, also bringing a terrific depth of experience and background, particularly in certain fields, that gets shared. And while it may not be particularly relevant to an accreditation criteria, suggestions for improvements, best practices, how to allocate resources, can be very inconsistent program to program, review to review. But the application of the standards themselves in relation to institution mission, and I'm always pointing that out to my board, because these missions are so diversified. How is the institution and its setting and its goals meeting the standard? And accreditors that I've worked with all work very, very hard to check their consistency at board level decisions, because that's kind of where the rubber hits the road. The peers gather information and they report on their findings, but ultimately the accreditor has the decision to make, and the board has responsibility for the consistency in their decision, institution to institution. So again, it's something that CHEA emphasizes. It's something the Department of Education emphasizes as well, that consistency in decision making is a critical function of fairness in the whole process.
And I'll just add quickly is that I appreciate at least knowing that rather the accrediting bodies that do conduct their review, that they know that they're always the focus of the institution, meaning that the mission of the institution guides in terms of direct what that review will look like. And so therefore, we know that there's going to be variations based on institutions, but knowing that the mission is in the forefront. But the criteria provide some level of consistency, but it's aimed directly in terms of fulfilling that mission. And so I think that's one of the key points in terms of making sure that there's rather differences. The other thing I would mention as well is the fact that, going back to what Bob and Leah shared, is that knowing that there's training and development. And so there's growth opportunities provided. So even though there may be some individual differences of how they go about it, it's not necessarily the what, but sometimes the how, but knowing that there's training and development for the accrediting bodies, that provides some assurances that there's opportunities to help those individuals to understand in terms of what that review should look like, what they should be examining, having the opportunity to conduct on-site reviews. I know that most part we're probably remote more now, but just having the opportunity, but there's some level of consistency that's provided there. So that's one of the things I would just share with the group as well.
Thank you. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're running out of time, but we still have such rich discussions to share. So Leah mentioned several minutes ago that CHEA just closed its call for comments for revised standards. And I'm going to be honest with you, the majority of comments that CHEA received were from the accrediting organizations. On the one hand, I understand that because the accrediting organizations are the ones who are going to be held to those standards. But on the other hand, it's CHEA member institutions who are accredited by those accrediting organizations that are then going to have their process affected by the change to CHEA standards. So Bob and Darrell, I wonder if you have just a few thoughts you might share, since CHEA was formed by the Academy, and the idea is that the CHEA standards will reflect what's important to member institutions and the students and families that they serve. What obligation or what role would you like to see the member institutions engage in to support CHEA's recognition work? I know it's a toughie.
Well, I would say that, in terms of the institution, because CHEA, in terms of its role as it relates to quality assurances, I think the institution is to make sure that one, a level of support in terms of that we remain a peer review process. So as we think about what advocacy, and so that's where we want to make sure that we remain autonomous and that we are not changing based on the political environment or who's in government or political offices. So I think that will be important. Also, too, knowing that, for any organization, you need talented people. And so you got to have the quality pool. And And that comes back to the point where, in terms of membership and dues, because you can't have the talented people if you can't pay them. And so we need to make sure that, again, we support our accrediting bodies and to make sure that we remain members and that we're providing the support so they can continue to advocate on our behalf. But those were probably the top ideas that came to my mind.
I would also just add to that, we have a 20-member board, and it represents all types of organizations that are in the membership, ranging from community college to doctoral granting institutions, and that all of those views are critical to evaluating how we might change or review standards and use those opportunities to better the CHEA membership and quality assurance and et cetera. So become involved, don't be hesitant, send in your thoughts and your views, don't leave it to somebody else.
Thank you. So CHEA is the non-governmental recognizing authority for accrediting organizations. So in the US, we have two authorities that recognize accrediting organizations, one being CHEA and the other being the Department of Education. I'm curious, and any of you feel free to weigh in, what do you think would be lost if the only recognizing authority was governmental?
Well, I think you would lose the academic community's vibrant and robust participation in this process. You know, I had responsibility some time ago about meeting with international delegations seeking to understand accreditation in the United States, and would always be met with some astonishment and marvel that we carry out this process with thousands and thousands of volunteers from the academic community who donate their time and their expertise because, you know, they believe in the process. And so, you know, if we were just subject to government review of accreditation and not a CHEA-based organization of the academic community, I think we would lose that emphasis on peer review and the spirit of the volunteer and the academic community's commitment to this enterprise.
Thank you. Bob, Darrell?
Yeah, I certainly think that's the critical element of the peer review process, and having the expertise of the individuals from the organizations programmatically and et cetera, and those expertise that live out the mission of the organization on a regular basis.
Yeah. And I'll just mention too, I think that as it relates to having that autonomy for institutions to fulfill their mission, I just think that the standards would change, and therefore there would be a level of compliance. But the compliance may be regulatory, where it loses sight where institutions are actually fulfilling their need in terms of the constituent groups that they serve. And so I think that having independence and working autonomously allows that to occur, in addition to allowing the academy to do the review, because they have the knowledge, the skills, the depth and understanding of the complexities of the institutions which we serve.
Thank you. So we have 2 minutes left, and we have 3 wonderful presenters. And I'm just wondering, I'm putting you on the spot. We didn't talk about this previously, so your answer can be, nope, I'm good. I'm just wondering if any of you or all of you have any final thoughts that you would like to share about how you believe that the CHEA recognition of accrediting organizations benefits its member institutions.
Well, one area CHEA is addressing through recognition is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's doing so in a much more forward-thinking manner than I think higher education has seen within the accreditation community. And so bringing accreditors into that conversation and looking at how their processes fairly address DEI, I think is a very interesting and strategic direction for CHEA to take higher education.
Thank you.
I think CHEA focuses on how do we make better opportunity for students. That's really critical as an outcome for the mission-driven institutions that we all serve.
Yeah, and I would just mention too, the fact that we're focused on innovative practices, therefore we're not becoming stagnant. We have to adapt and change as we see our world changing. And so recognizing how we teach and how students learn is really important. And so I think that's the value where we say we're challenging ourselves and we want to make sure that we're in compliance and we're meeting standards, we're meeting rigor, but at the same time, we're elevating ourselves to make sure that we're adapting to our current conditions, environment, and also thinking about the future. Where do we see ourselves 10 years, 15 years from now?
Well, thank you all. I can't believe our time is up. The hour just flew by, and I found the discussion to be interesting and engaging, and I know that our participants did as well. For anyone that has questions about the CHEA recognition process, you see my contact information on the screen. And just thank you again, Bob, Darrell, and Leah, for your participation today. And thank you to our members who tuned in for this important webinar. Have a good afternoon.